welcome back to the podcast. Today I want to dive into something that every student can relate to, and that is the way we study and the habits we build around it. Now I know from my own experience that studying can sometimes feel like a battle. You sit down with your books, and suddenly your phone seems way more interesting, or your mind keeps wandering. And then at the end of the day you realize you didn't get much done. But here's the thing, successful students aren't born with some secret talent. They don't necessarily study more hours than anyone else. What really makes the difference is the small habits they build and the way they approach learning. These habits make studying feel less stressful and more productive. And the good news is that anyone can develop them, no matter what your current level is. So in this episode, we're going to talk about 20 powerful study habits that successful students use all the time. And the best part is you don't have to change your whole life to apply them. You can start with just one or two, and then slowly add more into your daily routine. So if you've ever felt stuck, unmotivated, or distracted when studying, stay tuned, because this episode is packed with practical tips that can make your study sessions easier and way more effective. One of the most powerful things that successful students do is they never just sit down and randomly open a book without direction. They always start with a clear plan in mind. Because the truth is, when you sit to study without knowing exactly what you want to do, your brain gets overwhelmed. You spend the first few minutes flipping pages, looking at different sections, and trying to decide where to begin. And by the time you actually start, you've already lost focus and energy. But when you take even 1 minute before studying to decide what you're going to work on, everything feels lighter. For example, instead of saying I'm going to study biology, you can say I'll focus on Chapter 4 and make short notes about the key concepts. Or instead of I'll review English, you can say I'll write down 10 new vocabulary words and practice using them in sentences. This level of clarity gives your brain a target. And once you hit that target, you get a sense of achievement. That sense of progress makes you want to continue. And over time it trains you to approach every study session with purpose. And that simple habit alone can completely change the way you study. Another habit that successful students use is setting very specific goals for each study session. They don't just tell themselves I'm going to study today, because that's too vague and your brain doesn't know what to focus on. Instead, they break it down into clear, manageable tasks. For example, instead of saying I'll study math, they might say I'll finish solving 5 algebra problems and review the formulas for quadratic equations. Or instead of saying I'll read history, they might decide I'll summarize Chapter 3 and highlight the key dates and events. Having a clear target like this keeps your mind focused and reduces that feeling of overwhelm. And when you complete these small goals, you get a sense of accomplishment that motivates you to continue. It's like giving your brain checkpoints along the way. And the more consistent you are with this habit, the easier it becomes to stay organized and actually make progress, instead of spending hours studying, but feeling like you haven't achieved anything. One of the most important habits that successful students follow is studying consistently every single day, even if it's just for a short period of time, because they understand that cramming all the material at the last minute rarely works and usually leads to stress and frustration. When you try to study everything in one night, your brain can only retain a limited amount of information, and most of it quickly fades. But by studying a little bit each day, you keep the material fresh in your mind, you reinforce your understanding gradually, and it becomes much easier to remember later. It doesn't have to be a long session. Even 20 or 30 minutes of focused studying daily can have a huge impact. The key is making it a habit and part of your daily routine. Once you do this consistently, your brain starts expecting it. It becomes natural, and you don't feel as overwhelmed by large amounts of material. Plus, studying in small chunks over time allows you to absorb information more deeply. It gives you a chance to reflect on what you learned, identify areas that need more attention, and really understand the concepts instead of just memorizing them. And over weeks and months, this habit of daily study builds a strong foundation for exams, projects, and long-term learning. It makes you more confident, less stressed, and more prepared. So consistency, no matter how small the study session is one of the biggest secrets of students who succeed academically. Another habit that highly successful students use is practicing active recall instead of just passively reading or highlighting their notes. Because the truth is your brain remembers information much better when you actively try to retrieve it. It's one thing to read a paragraph and think you understand it. But if you close the book and try to explain it in your own words or answer questions about it, that's when real learning happens. For example, after studying a section, they might ask themselves what the main points were, or try to summarize it aloud as if they're teaching someone else. Some even create flashcards or practice quizzes to test their memory. This process forces the brain to work, strengthens the neural connections, and makes it easier to recall the information later. The more you practice active recall, the more confident you become with the material, and it also helps you identify what you actually don't understand, so you can focus on those parts. Over time, this habit turns studying from a passive, forgettable activity into an active process that really sticks, and it's one of the most effective ways to prepare for exams and retain knowledge long-term. One powerful habit that successful students use is spaced repetition, which means reviewing material multiple times over increasing intervals instead of trying to cram everything at once. This works because our brains naturally forget information if we don't revisit it. By spacing out your study sessions, like reviewing notes a day after learning them, then a few days later, then a week later, you strengthen your memory and make it much easier to recall later. For example, you might study a chapter today, quiz yourself tomorrow, then review it again after 3 days, and maybe once more a week later. This method helps move information from short-term memory to long-term memory, and it reduces the stress of last-minute studying because you're constantly reinforcing what you learned. Successful students use this habit to retain large amounts of information without feeling overwhelmed, and once you get into the routine of spaced repetition, studying becomes much more efficient, less stressful, and it builds confidence in remembering the material when it really counts. Taking the time to write your own notes and summaries is one of the most important habits that successful students practice. It might seem time-consuming at first, but the benefits are enormous because when you put information into your own words, your brain has to process and really understand it, instead of just passively reading or highlighting. For example, after finishing a chapter, you could write a short summary of the key points, create diagrams to visualize concepts, or make bullet lists of the most important ideas. This forces you to identify what is truly essential and helps you see connections between different pieces of information. It also makes reviewing later much easier because your notes are organized in a way that makes sense to you. Rather than just following the structure of a textbook, successful students often combine this habit with active recall, using their own summaries to quiz themselves, explain the material out loud, or teach it to someone else. This strengthens understanding and memory even more. Over time, writing your own notes trains your brain to process information deeply instead of superficially. It reduces the feeling of being overwhelmed when exams approach because you already have a clear, organized set of materials to study from. And it also builds confidence because you know that you truly understand the material rather than just memorizing it. Developing this habit consistently can completely change the way you study, making learning more effective, more efficient, and far less stressful. Creating a focused and distraction-free study environment is a habit that successful students never overlook. The space where you study has a huge impact on your ability to concentrate. If your phone is constantly buzzing, or there's noise around you, your brain gets pulled in different directions and studying becomes much less effective. That's why many students choose a quiet corner, a library, or even a specific desk at home where they know they can focus. Some even remove their phones or use apps that block notifications for a certain period. Having a dedicated study space sends a signal to your brain that it's time to focus. It helps build a mental routine. And over time, just sitting in that space can automatically trigger your brain to concentrate. A clean and organized environment also plays a role. When everything you need is within reach and there's no clutter to distract you, you can focus more on learning instead of looking for materials or getting sidetracked. This habit of controlling your environment might seem simple, but it makes a huge difference in the quality of your study sessions and how much information you actually retain. Using a structured study technique like the Pomodoro method is a habit that successful students rely on to maintain focus and avoid burnout. Instead of trying to study for hours on end without a break, they break their study time into shorter, focused intervals, usually around 25 minutes, followed by a 5-minute break. During these focus periods, they eliminate all distractions and give their full attention to the task at hand. The short breaks allow the brain to rest, recharge, and process information, which actually improves concentration and retention. After completing a few cycles, they take a longer break to relax, stretch, or get some fresh air before returning to work. This method helps prevent mental fatigue, keeps motivation high, and makes studying feel more manageable over time. Using a technique like this trains the brain to work efficiently within focus periods and makes it easier to stay productive without feeling overwhelmed. It's a simple habit, but one that consistently leads to more effective study sessions and better results in the long run. Taking regular breaks during study sessions is one of the habits that successful students take very seriously. It might feel counterintuitive at first to step away from your books when there's still so much to cover. But the reality is that our brains are not designed to focus intensely for hours on end without rest. If you push yourself too hard, concentration drops, retention suffers, and studying becomes stressful rather than productive. That's why they intentionally schedule short breaks during their study time. Even just a few minutes to stretch, walk around, drink water, or close their eyes and relax. These small pauses allow the brain to reset, process the information it just absorbed, and prepare for the next round of focus. Successful students often use methods like the Pomodoro technique, studying in 25 to 30-minute intervals followed by a 5-minute break, and then taking a longer break after a few cycles. Breaks also play a crucial role in reducing stress and preventing mental burnout. Without them, even a long study session can feel exhausting and ineffective over time. Taking breaks trains your brain to work in concentrated bursts while maintaining energy and motivation. It also improves long-term retention because your mind has time to consolidate information. The habit of stepping away at the right moments may seem simple, but it dramatically increases both the quality and efficiency of your study sessions, making learning more manageable, less overwhelming, and ultimately more successful. Focusing on one task at a time is a habit that successful students practice consistently. Multitasking might feel like you're getting more done, but in reality it divides your attention and makes it harder to retain information. When you try to study 2 subjects at once or check your phone while reading, your brain has to switch back and forth, which slows you down and increases mistakes. Instead, successful students dedicate their full attention to a single subject or task for a set period of time. They break their study sessions into clear, focused blocks where nothing else competes for their attention. This allows them to fully understand and process the material they are working on. When the session ends, they can switch to another task with a refreshed mind. Focusing on one thing at a time also reduces mental fatigue and makes it easier to track progress. Over time, this habit trains your brain to stay engaged, improves comprehension, and ultimately makes studying more effective. Because the quality of focus matters much more than the quantity of tasks you try to do simultaneously. Reviewing material regularly instead of waiting until exams is one of the most important habits that successful students develop. It's easy to think that cramming everything the night before will work, But the truth is most of that information is quickly forgotten. When you consistently go back over what you've studied, you give your brain the chance to reinforce and solidify that knowledge over time. For example, after studying a chapter, a successful student might revisit their notes the next day, then a few days later, and again a week later, each time strengthening their memory and understanding of the material. This repeated exposure helps move information from short-term memory into long-term memory, making it much easier to recall when it really matters. Regular review also gives students the chance to notice which areas they still don't fully understand, allowing them to ask questions, clarify concepts, or focus more on difficult topics before it's too late. This prevents the panic and stress that comes with cramming, because by the time an exam approaches, the material is already familiar and manageable. Over time, making regular review a habit transforms studying from a last-minute, high-pressure task into a consistent, productive learning process. It ensures that knowledge sticks, improves confidence, reduces anxiety, and ultimately makes studying far more efficient and effective. And this habit alone can make a huge difference in both performance and understanding across all subjects. Using practice tests and quizzes is a habit that successful students rely on heavily because it allows them to actively check their understanding instead of just assuming they know the material. When you test yourself under exam-like conditions, you see what you actually remember and where the gaps are. For example, after studying a chapter, they might answer end-of-chapter questions, take online quizzes, or create their own questions based on their notes. This process not only reinforces memory, but also helps them become familiar with the format and style of questions they might encounter in real exams. Practice testing also builds confidence, because the more you simulate real exam conditions, the less anxious you feel when the actual test comes. Over time, incorporating this habit trains your brain to recall information more quickly and accurately, and it makes study sessions more interactive and effective. Instead of just passively reading or highlighting, it turns learning into an active process, which is one of the most powerful ways to prepare for exams and retain knowledge long-term. Asking questions whenever something is unclear is a habit that successful students never skip. They understand that pretending to understand something or staying silent when confused only slows down their learning. Whether it's asking a teacher after class, discussing with classmates, or looking up explanations online, they actively seek clarification as soon as a doubt arises. For example, if they don't understand a concept in math, they might go to a teacher or use online resources to see different examples until it clicks. This habit prevents gaps in understanding from piling up over time. It builds confidence because they know they truly grasp the material, and it saves a lot of stress before exams. Over time, regularly asking questions trains the brain to be curious, proactive, and engaged, turning studying into an active process rather than passive memorization, and it ensures that what they learn is deep, meaningful, and easier to recall when it counts. Studying at your peak time is a habit that successful students pay close attention to. Everyone has a time of day when their mind is most alert and focused. For some it's early in the morning, for others it's late at night, and successful students figure out when they work best and schedule their most challenging study sessions during that time. For example, if you know you concentrate best in the morning, you might tackle difficult subjects like math or science first thing, leaving easier or more routine tasks for later in the day. This makes studying more efficient because your brain is working at its optimal capacity. It also reduces frustration and procrastination, and over time, consistently studying at your peak hours trains your mind to focus more effectively, turning study sessions into productive and satisfying experiences rather than exhausting chores. Staying organized is a habit that can completely change the way you study. Successful students keep their notes, books, and study materials tidy and easy to access. They often use folders, notebooks, or digital tools to categorize topics, and they avoid piles of loose papers that can cause stress and wasted time. For example, Having a dedicated folder for each subject or a clearly structured digital note system allows them to quickly find what they need without breaking their focus. Organization also helps with planning study sessions, setting goals, and tracking progress over time. This habit reduces mental clutter, saves time, and makes studying feel more manageable. It gives a sense of control and confidence, because when everything is in order, your mind can focus entirely on learning rather than searching for materials or remembering what comes next. Balancing study with rest, exercise, and healthy habits is another key strategy. Successful students understand that their brain needs energy to focus and retain information. They make sure to sleep enough, eat well, and take time to exercise or relax, for example. Even a short walk or stretching between study sessions can improve blood flow to the brain and help memory and concentration. Neglecting these basic needs might seem like it gives more time to study, but in reality it reduces efficiency and increases stress. Over time, maintaining a balance between work and self-care helps students stay motivated, prevents burnout, and allows them to study more effectively, making learning sustainable in the long run. Rewarding yourself after completing tasks is a habit that helps maintain motivation. Successful students often set small incentives for finishing a study session or completing a challenging task. For example, they might allow themselves a favorite snack, a short walk, or some time on social media after hitting a goal. These rewards create positive associations with studying, making it feel less like a chore, and over time, it encourages consistency and persistence. When your brain knows that effort leads to something enjoyable, you naturally feel more motivated to start and finish tasks. And this simple habit can make a huge difference in maintaining focus and energy throughout your study routine. Keeping a positive mindset is an essential habit that separates successful students from those who struggle. Instead of thinking, "This is too hard," or "I'll never get it," they reframe challenges as opportunities to grow. They remind themselves that learning takes time and effort, and that making mistakes is part of the process. For example, if a concept doesn't make sense at first, they approach it with curiosity and persistence. Over time, maintaining this positive attitude reduces stress, boosts confidence, and makes it easier to stay motivated. Because when you believe you can learn and improve, studying becomes less intimidating and more productive, turning obstacles into stepping stones instead of roadblocks. Tracking progress is a habit that helps students stay aware of how much they're achieving and where they need to improve. Successful students often use study journals, checklists, or digital apps to record what they've completed and what's left to do. For example, checking off completed chapters or tasks gives a visual sense of accomplishment. It also helps identify weak areas that need extra attention. Over time, this habit builds accountability and motivation, because seeing progress, even small steps, encourages consistency and keeps students from feeling stuck or overwhelmed. It transforms studying from a vague effort into a structured, measurable, and rewarding process. Staying consistent is the final habit that ties everything together. Successful students know that one perfect study session isn't enough to achieve lasting results. They focus on building routines and maintaining them day after day. Even when they don't feel like it, over time, consistency compounds, small efforts add up, and studying becomes a natural part of life rather than a stressful obligation. For example, studying a little every day, reviewing regularly, and following these habits consistently ensures that knowledge is retained, skills improve, and confidence grows. And it's this long-term dedication, more than anything else, that separates average results from truly successful outcomes.